Go ahead,
Right.
Dan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Mead-Smith, and on behalf of Bartlett and myself, welcome to our SPN Washington Policy Center ALEC Tech Policy virtual event. This is our second one that we've done via video. Worked out great last time, so we're glad you're with us today. We have a great turnout of folks from all over the country on the call. We do these about quarterly. We were going to do it during the ALEC annual meeting, which is a couple weeks ago, but we decided to do it separate given their agenda. So we're glad you're with us today. And both Bartlett and I have injured ourselves recently. So I'm on crutches and in a boot, and Bartlett's sore from both having falls over the last week. So I guess the key is not to be a host of this call. But we have a great group that can do all the talking and presenting today. Roger Ettner from Recon Analytics will start us off on the 4G economy. And then our friend Rick Zimmerman from NCTA will talk about rural barriers to broadband. Rick was just been on our call last time. And then Jonathan from ALEC will talk about election security and disinformation. And then Evan is with us from the FCC Chairman's office, and we're thrilled to have him give an update on what's happening at the FCC. So 4 great speakers, 4 great topics: FCC, election security, broadband, and the 4G economy and what 5G can offer. Again, we do this about quarterly. Hopefully you're on our list. If you're not, email WPC at washingtonpolicy.org, and we'll make sure you get on this list for these calls. And then we also do a monthly tech newsletter that we'll also send you each month, and we'll have a new issue coming out here in a couple weeks. So with that, I will turn over to my co-host Bartlett, and he will introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate your opening. And I think the lesson learned is that we should all be more sedentary. This moving around business just leads to broken bones and falling down hills. It's really not any good. COVID should teach us the lesson: just stay inside, stop moving. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Very excited to be able to find a way for us to continue to get together, even if it looks very different than it did last year. And I know Dan is as well, so I'm going to speak for both of us. Both very excited that the numbers of folks who are registering and tuning in continues to increase, which is great. Even when we had the combined in-person and telephone, conference call, we didn't have as many people as we're getting now, and we have more on this call than we did on the last one. So very exciting stuff. So with that, and so that I can give each speaker about 14 minutes total, that's for speaking and Q&A, and stay within the hour, I am going to turn the floor over to Roger Ettner. If any of you have ever looked at any kind of economic data from about the wireless industry, you probably know Recon Analytics. He is well known in that crowd and others. I use his work regularly as foundation for things I write, and find what he does quite insightful. The particular point here is an analysis of the 4G world, and pretty much hinting or projecting what we can imagine will happen in the 5G world. So with that, Roger, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this very kind introduction. Today we published a report together with CTIA on the 4G decade, which is basically 2011 to 2019. And we quantified the benefits that the United States received by being the global leader in 4G. 2 years ago, I published also a report with CTIA on what happens when you lose generational leadership, and track this through 1G, 2G, 3G, and then 4G. And basically, the results are not very pretty when you lose generation leadership, because a part of your economy dies and it doesn't come back. But when you have generational leadership, the benefits are tremendous. So for the United States, between 2011, when we launched the 4G networks, and 2019, end of 2019, when the first 5G networks launched, basically 10% of the growth in that decade came due to products and services enabled by wireless carriers. Really a significant impact. In the same time period, the wireless industry overall and its associated services grew by 253%. That's the fastest segment in the industry, or in the economy, actually. 4G networks now support 20 million jobs in the United States. What we also did, and we looked at that the wireless industry now contributes about $690 billion to GDP. And we measured the trajectory of what would have happened if we would have gone the same growth path in 3G. And the difference between 3G and 4G is $248 billion, because we really took here the global leadership, and smartphones are here the emblematic device and way how we're using wireless. And that really, and because smartphones weren't really there in 2011, we're at the very, very beginning of it. And in 2011, the wireless industry enabled about 3.7 million jobs. By 2019, that grew to 20.4 million jobs that were basically using wireless on a daily basis. You can't think of businesses like Lyft, Uber, and Airbnb without a mobile device, because that's the way you use it. Then also, not only did we get great value and a lot more economic activity, due to falling prices, both in absolute value and on a per unit basis, American consumers saved $130 billion. In 2011, an unlimited voice, text, and data product was on average about $114 a month. At the end of 2019, it's $65. So that came down tremendously. And the price per megabyte that we're using went from 20 cents to half a cent in the same time period. And speeds went up. 7 megabits at the end of 2011, 41 megabits today. And with more higher speeds, we can do a lot more things. We can watch video on mobile devices, which is actually the big data user here. Data usage went from half a gigabyte in 2011 to 9.2 in 2019. And all of that was only made possible through accelerating investment. During the 4G era, the wireless industry invested $261 billion in its network. That compares to $183 billion in the 3G era, $108 billion during the 2G era, and just $19 billion way back when we had 1G and the networks were very small. So in a summary, where 2 years ago I think rightfully scared a lot of people of what could happen if we're losing 5G leadership because not the right policies were in place. We put the right policies in place, and a lot of credit goes to the FCC and Chairman Pai, and Evan can talk about, and we'll talk about later, of the other things that the FCC does to ensure that we will continue to have leadership. But here, we're clearly documenting all the good things that came from the United States leading in it, and how it gained and added to the prosperity and jobs in the United States. So with that summary, I would like to direct you to the CTI homepage, webpage, or my page, reconanalytics.com. You can download the report. It's a quick 14-page read, and with this, I would like to open up to questions. So now I have to put glasses on.
Alrighty.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So I am looking in my questions here. I don't see any. Let's see. I think there I am. I don't see any in the written. Does anyone have any questions? If so, I think the way to do that, and I might need technical assist here, but is to put them in the chat function.
Exactly.
Which,
yeah, we just
okay.
announced. So if you have any questions, go to the chat function, which you should see up on your screen there, or you can email that WPC@washingtonpolicy.org too. Chat's the most streamlined way to do it, but you can also send an email to WPC@washingtonpolicy.org. Do you want to start with the question, Bartlett?
Sure, and I've got one. I might be in reverse order here, but this is from Eric Peterson, who is with the Pelican Institute in Louisiana, Roger, and he is asking, what does 5G American leadership mean for network security?
What it means is that the encryption standards and the encryption software gets made here in the United States, because it's always about first mover advantage. And by having the first networks, you have the most demand here. And so that will allow American programmers and American companies to write these additional security protocols rather than somebody else who doesn't mean us well.
And also, Roger, while we're at it, we are being asked to supply a link to the paper. I'm sure we can do that, but is there an easy way? Did you say it was on the CTIA website?
Yes, it's on the CTIA website, and it's on my homepage, www.reconanalytics.com, and it's the first post there.
Very good. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute. And then, thank you. Sarah reminds me that it is also on ctia.org, which you guys should check out anyway. There's tons of other information that isn't as timely as an announcement today of a new study. So we're very excited that you could be with us, Roger, for the unveiling, so to speak. We have time for one more question if there is one out there. All right, but seeing none, Roger, if people want to get in touch with you with questions, what's the best way to do that?
They can either send me an email, roger.entner@reconanalytics.com. That's ROGER.ENTNER@RECONALYTICS, or they can just call me 617-823-3363. That's 617-823-3363.
Thank you, Roger. And I think people will find the same that I do. One thing I appreciate about chatting with Roger is he actually makes economics attainable for those of us who do not have a PhD in economics, and his studies read the same way. So I do encourage people to take advantage of that. Thank you very much, Roger, for joining us. And we'll hope to have you back sometime when you have a new study out.
Would be delighted. Okay, thank you very much for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Rick Zimmerman is, let's see, I'm going to let the camera catch up. There we go. Rick Zimmerman is going to be joining us. Again, a person who needs very little introduction to this crowd, but in case you don't know Rick, Rick is the state go-to guy on all things cable and television. I will say personally, a good friend, but someone who has an inexhaustible amount of information about his industry and frankly about a whole lot of things, but certainly about his industry. And I would urge all of you, if you don't know him, to get to know him at some point, particularly if you're interested in any number of issues that touch broadband service providers. With that, Rick, take it away.
Thanks, Bartlett. I think you meant to say exhausting, not inexhaustible. But
Oh wait, yeah.
thanks, Bartlett. Thanks, Dan, SPN, ALEC. So Evan really raised the bar. He spoke in his segment about a moral issue, and we're not usually on this call talking about moral issues. So maybe we can describe getting broadband to everyone as a kind of a moral issue as we think about it. I'm going to switch gears a tiny bit and come back to rural, because just Monday, a report came out that I wanted to highlight. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. Some of you may have seen a report from the New America Foundation's Open Technology Institute called The Cost of Connectivity. And it was a redo of a 2012 report that they had done. And naturally, for those that are familiar with OTI, it was, woe is me, American broadband is too expensive, not enough, government-owned networks are the way to go, et cetera, et cetera. And our friends at the New York Law School, two academics, Michael Santorelli and Alexander Karras, Alex Karras, some of you may know from the Detroit Lions, so no relation, but same pronunciation. They did a response and analysis of the OTI report and found it incredibly lacking. And so I just want to show one little piece on the exec summary, and there we go. Yeah, so if we look at the exec summary, I'm just going to read the sort of top line 5 items here, and I did shoot it over to Katie, who hopefully can post it in the chat. But OTI ignores essential context. They engage in disaster opportunism. They manifest an anti-ISP bias. The report reflects many methodological shortcomings, and their support for municipal broadband as a solution to the crisis ignores data and real-world evidence of struggle and failure. So, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? The report, the methodology, very shoddy. I haven't seen too much pickup that we usually see in the tech blogosphere. Obviously, there's a lot going on with big tech, CEO, Section 230, everything else. But we do find some of these analyses, peppering different articles and comparisons of U.S. broadband to overseas broadband, as well as highlighting various government-owned networks, 5 in particular. And this 37-page report does a great job of responding to that. So I would bring that to your attention and hope that you'll take a read. So let me switch gears to rural broadband deployment. And of course, there are many aspects of rural broadband deployment. We've spoken about some of them on this call. Many of you have heard about it before. Any of the state legislators on this call, I'm sure, have dealt with it, have heard from constituents, et cetera. I'm going to focus on 2 aspects of it, pole attachments and something known as the eligible telecommunications carrier designation that I think we briefly spoke about on the last call. But I just want to point out that at this time, the question of where broadband is not available, which I can differentiate or should be differentiated from where broadband is available, but people choose not to subscribe. That's the adoption issue. But in terms of the deployment issue, there's 5 or 6% of the country that doesn't have 25 downstream, 3 up, which is the FCC's definition. There's questions about what should the proper definition be, but basically 5 or 6% that doesn't have broadband available today. And there have been billions of dollars spent. The FCC is poised to spend another $16 billion for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. We have found through various state broadband grant programs, there's really no one size fits all for tackling this problem. The bottom line problem is that it's not economically expedient to serve these areas, which is the reason that the private sector has not gone in. And the key for any grant or other programs is to change the economics of deploying the network. We refer to what we are doing, which is usually building out from where we already have a network, to areas that are adjacent or contiguous. Some people call it an edge out strategy. You can think of it as line extensions. Sometimes it's an infill, to be distinguished, of course, from incel, but infill, where we're filling in properties where there might just be 100, 200 homes, something like that. And that's what a number of state broadband grant programs have really worked on. But the other side of the coin, besides subsidies, is reducing barriers to deployment, regulatory barriers or other impediments. And that's where the pole attachments come in. So in order to get our service to a customer, we have to string the cables on poles or put them underground. As you can see in this photo, I like to, when I'm driving around in different places, sometimes snap a photo of various pole attachment setups, because that's not weird at all. I know that's what people do. I have an album on my iPhone of pole attachments. This one is pretty neat. I don't mean like neato, but neat in terms of orderly when you look at it. And when we come in to deploy new services, we find, particularly in rural areas, that the cost of attaching to poles can be up to 35% of a new build. And the process is that we make an application with the owner of the pole, which is typically an electric company, sometimes a phone company, sometimes a municipality, sometimes an electric co-op, but most often an investor-owned utility. You make an application, there has to be a manual inspection to make sure that the pole is in good shape, to see whether any of these other attachments that are already there need to be moved in order to have sufficient clearance. So this is all a time-consuming and pricey process for the permitting, sending the inspectors out and doing all of those things. But the problem, the newest problem that we are looking at and dealing with, and have filed a petition for declaratory ruling at the FCC, relates to aging poles. Poles have a useful life, usually 25 or 30 years, depending on the location, the weather, the elements, the environment, etc. And the poles are depreciated on the books of the owner. Sometimes we find that when we want to add a new attachment, that the existing pole is too old to be able to sustain the load, or it's decrepit for some reason. And the normal practice would be that the pole owner, who receives the primary benefit of a new pole in terms of less maintenance, lower cost on the books, it goes into their rate base, it's not depreciated, all of those things, the pole owner shares in the cost of the new pole. But what we have found in a number of instances is that pole owners want to charge the new guy the entire cost of a new pole. And we think that the FCC rules make clear that that's not the appropriate treatment for pole replacement costs, but we've asked for a declaratory ruling so that everyone understands exactly that. So I've also shared, I'm not sure that will be in the chat, a blog post that we had on it, and I think a link to the filing. Happy to discuss that offline. But the bottom line is you'll hear more about this. I think that what we have seen in some cases is a gamesmanship or a strategic delay on the part of investor-owned utilities, where they know the pole is aging, they haven't gotten around to replacing it themselves, and are waiting for someone to come in and ask to attach so that they can try to foist those costs on the new person. So that is a problem. In our petition, we cite one example of Charter in New York, where they're rolling out 5,000 miles of new fiber, a couple 100,000 new homes that they were going to serve, and 25% of their deployment costs were related to this question of replacing aging poles. So moving on as my time runs out, I just want to flash up one other picture. We talked a little bit about the eligible telecommunications carrier designation I think on a prior call. And this is an anachronistic, outdated artifact of the 1996 Telecom Act that requires in our case, a broadband carrier to receive permission essentially from a state in order to be granted federal universal service funds. So let me be clear on that. In order to receive federal funds, you must receive permission and subject yourself to oversight from a state public utility commission. We believe that leads to delay, extra cost. In some cases, some of our companies choose not to proceed. And if we go back to where I began on rural deployment, the reason for that is if we are just, let's say, edging out our network and building, say, 100 to 100, 200 new homes, which has been the case in, for example, the Massachusetts Broadband Initiative, their program, it's not necessarily worth the time, the effort, the cost, the regulatory battle to go to a state commission and subject yourself to that oversight. And the reason I threw this chart, which is a draft, and I should have marked it draft, it's still a work in progress, but here's at least 13 states that have their own state broadband programs, even California. And I think everyone on this call knows what I mean when I say even California. Even California does not require you to subject yourself to utility commission oversight in order to receive the state broadband funds. So there are several bills in Congress that would address that. We don't need to go into all the specifics here, but just wanted you to know that this is an ongoing issue. So let me pause there and back over to Bartlett for any questions.
Thank you, Rick. Let me, I've got two questions, one from me, one from Representative Harmsworth, that we can do real quickly, I think. So you mentioned that particularly in the case of Charter, that right now 25% of their additional costs in that particular situation are attributable to having to replace old or otherwise needing replaced poles. Do you have any sense of how long, what does that do for deployment? I get that in a vague way, obviously go, oh, well, that costs more, but what does costing more mean on the ground in the states where these think tanks are operating?
What it means is less deployment, because funds are not unlimited, and whether we're talking about, scarce government subsidy dollars or capital investment dollars, any private company is only going to set aside a particular budget for capital investment and spread it as far as they can. But if more of the cost goes to pay for wood, basically to replace these old wooden poles, then less of it goes to glass, new fiber, or copper in the case of coax or whatever it is. So fewer homes served if you're paying more to replace wooden poles. And again, the principle of the existing rules, which is when modifications take place, those that benefit from the modification share in the cost, suggests that the pole owner should be sharing in the cost, but sometimes that doesn't happen, and we're asking the FCC to make that clear. The other thing we're asking, by the way, in our petition is that pole attachment complaints be handled in their rocket docket, which they have, which is an accelerated process for handling complaints and disputes.
So I will quick comment. Sarah Yee says, do not fret. She also has a complete album of pole attachments on her iPhone. So you guys can write out together.
All right, we're going to have to compare notes, Sarah.
This is going to be a new game. And then finally, a question from Representative Harmsworth, which is, what impact do you think Elon Musk's Starlink satellite service will have on wired rural broadband deployment, speed, and adoption?
So I think it will. Look, we've been big proponents of all technologies, fixed wireless, traditional satellite, which has gotten better. I mean, I understand now we're not in the satellite business, but Hughes, Viasat, et cetera, they have improved. They put up new birds with higher capacity. You know, there are some areas of the country where wired will just never make sense. The question that I can't answer is for whether it's SpaceX or Starlink or whichever, you know, different kind of new low Earth orbit satellite comes around, the extent to which it's really serving those that otherwise weren't served, or some kind of competitive alternative where existing providers may be able to do it, you know, less expensively or with more capacity or something like that. But we view it as a positive. We know that we will never, look, even, you know, phone service, electricity, you know, water and sewer and indoor plumbing, right? We're not 100% across the country today. There's no reason to expect that broadband would ever be 100% wired. So any technology that can help us achieve that goal, we welcome it.
Thank you, Rick. Really appreciate your time for joining us, and appreciate you being available. Quickly, how do people get hold of you?
rzimmerman@ncta.com, and it should be in the chat or elsewhere, but I'll spell it out because I heard Evan say, you know, Evan at Swarstraber or whatever, and everyone's scratching their head. Yeah, okay, Swarstraber, right? I know how to spell that. Well, no one in my entire life has ever spelled my last name correctly because it has a C and one M. So R-C as in cat, I, M as in Mary, E-R-M-A-N at NCTA, Nancy Charlie Tango Alpha.com.
Thank you, Rick. And speaking of CAT, perfect transition to go to our last speaker, the current task force director for ALEC's Communications and Technology Task Force. I think he's been in that role for almost 5 years now, 4.5 years now, Jonathan. And I will say, to his credit, literally one of the people that I'm constantly impressed with, who can pick up a topic and in a matter of a couple weeks literally sound better and more eloquent in its explanation than most experts in the field. He has an amazing gift to be able to absorb and digest information. With that, Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you. I'll just note we are a couple minutes behind. That's no problem. But so if everyone could hang in till 5 after the hour or so, that way we'll get in any questions for you. But if you just keep an eye on the time, Jonathan, that'd be great. And with that, take it away.
Thank you. I will, and I'll try to condense my presentation as much as possible. So I was asked to talk a little bit about election security. It's been a topic that I have participated in since 2006, before I was a lawyer and definitely before I was a policy analyst. Elections are typically things that not a lot of people think about, except for maybe every 2 to 4 years, and that with a presidential election, gubernatorial election, Senate election, congressional election, and for people in state think tanks and for state policymakers, the state rep and state senator races. Underlying all that, though, is an infrastructure that may be particularly vulnerable. So before I launch in, I do want to provide a bit of an introduction into the topic, a bit of a roadmap, and then we'll get into some specific topics a little as we go on. So election security really is cybersecurity. It's just a niche of cybersecurity. And there are a couple different components to election security. There's the actual physical security, and then there is we'll call it personal security. The way that I kind of distinguish the two is to talk about the vulnerabilities in voting processes and then the vulnerabilities in election processes. It's just an easy way to kind of distinguish between the different types of threats. So as we look into this discussion, we'll look a little bit about the history. We'll discuss the vulnerabilities. We'll talk a little bit about how COVID has changed the threat matrix, and then we'll kind of discuss solutions and priorities. Before really delving into it, it's really important to remember that election security, election issues came to the forefront really in 2016 due to foreign actors attempting to influence elections. And multiple reports are out there about Russia's attempts to influence the elections. Russia was not able to change the outcome, but what they were able to do, or what they attempted to do, was to cause people to distrust the elections process. Russia, borrowing from Soviet tactics on active measures and disinformation, they don't really want to change the outcome. They just want Western liberalized democracies, and that's small d, that's not the bad word democracy, Western liberalized democracies to question their institutions and to question the outcome. They want to divide and conquer, so to speak, among Western, again, liberalized democracies. So they want to create chaos. They want to sow discord. And they do that through a number of different means, which we'll discuss later. So first, we'll discuss the history. Why is cybersecurity related to elections such a big issue? Well, to understand that, we actually have to go back to 2000. So hopefully, at least a few of you remember the 2000 presidential election and the controversy between Bush and Gore in Florida. During that time, during the recounts, we learned such wonderful phrases as dimpled chads, pregnant chads, and the extent and resources and bandwidth required for a recount. To try to solve some of those problems related to analog, Congress in 2002 passed the Help America Vote Act. Let me take one more quick step back. During the 2000 presidential election and every presidential election prior to that, voting was a very analog process. You either had a voting machine where you selected a lever, you had butterfly ballots where you poked holes, or something very non-digital, very paper-oriented. Similarly, the records for voter registration and other things were kept decentralized. They were typically kept in the county Department of Elections, not statewide, although statewide may have had copies. But the principal entities responsible for maintaining voter registration lists were your county elections officials. That all changed with the 2002 Help America Vote Act. The Help America Vote Act did several things. First, it provided a ton of money for states to digitize their elections, so to purchase electronic voting machines. If the states accepted the money, there were certain requirements for the states to do. Those requirements included developing a centralized, single, interactive, computerized statewide voter registration list that had the capability to be coordinated with other state agencies, such as the Department of Motor Vehicles, Vital Statistics, for the purposes of list maintenance. That is, if you move, being able to remove your name from where you just moved from. The result was we traded one set of vulnerabilities, that is the risk of recounts and dimpled chads and pregnant chads, and not knowing the result of an election on election night, for another set of vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities are primarily electronic. And so these are vulnerabilities that typically states and local governments have to wrestle with. They're ones that impact states, and it's something that state policymakers need to think of more than just every 2 to 4 years. So let me define the difference between a voting process and an election and the elections process. Voting process is everything that goes into voting that doesn't relate to a campaign. So that would include your machines, your voter registration databases, including the storage and list maintenance, absentee and mail-in voting, vote reporting, communications between elections officials, recounts, and reporting the count, for example. And a lot of this kind of priorities and threats is based off of what happened before COVID. So a lot of the media focus, and probably when I say election vulnerability, the first thing that comes to most people's mind happens to be the voting machines, and whether the machines themselves are vulnerable or whether they are secure. Easy enough to say the machines aren't necessarily secure, but it takes a lot to actually hack a machine. It takes physical access to the machine. It often takes screwdrivers and other parts that may be spotted. Long analysis put short, for those wishing to influence elections, it is a very pre-COVID, very high risk, low reward. And I like to say the best way I know is for everyone that's voted in person, you know the sweet old ladies that run most of the voting precinct locations. They kind of know what's going on their floor, and if something looks funny, they will say and do something or at least question you. The larger risk happens to be the registration databases. As mentioned, HAVA required states to go to a single centralized computerized database. This means that there is a single point, theoretically a single point that bad actors can access. Not only can they access, they can manipulate. And these registration lists are what are used by counties to determine whether someone can vote. They're also used to determine, in some states that have universal mail-in balloting, where the ballots get mailed to. For states that require absentee ballots to be requested, it has that type of thing. Anyone who's ever gotten these lists also knows that the databases can tell you whether someone routinely votes in person or whether they routinely vote absentee. So the threat with these is that a foreign actor, if they are not secured, could access them and manipulate them. Now, in 2016 and 2018, there's no evidence that the Russians or any other foreign government were able to manipulate or chose to manipulate, but 21 states, according to the Department of Homeland Security and CISA, 21 states reported, or DHS reported to the states that foreign actors attempted to or successfully got into these databases. Then there's kind of, as far as another vulnerability, vote reporting and communications. A lot of these are electronic, so this would include the vote reporting. I believe it was Illinois reported that Russians were able to access and partially control the website used to return election results. So again, go back to what the purpose of foreign interference typically is: cause you to distrust the results or the institutions. Nothing more distrustful than putting up a fraudulent number or saying candidate A won when in fact candidate B won. And the state's not actually doing the reporting, but the foreign government is. So now quickly moving on to elections process. This elections process are the candidates, the campaigns, the volunteers, the parties, as well as how people consume information. Disinformation and hacking are two problems related to that. There's been a lot on how Russia used, the Internet Research Agency and other agencies use social media to disseminate false or misleading information, or even real valid information that was improperly obtained, the hacked emails. And as far as both 2018, 2006, and 20, we expect that Russia will continue to try, but that DHS and CISA are doing better, as well as states are doing better at recognizing the attempts, but that China and other foreign nations may try more things. So I'll quickly move to some of the solutions here and then open up for questions. Easy thing on solutions, we have to presume that all officials, all races, and all campaigns are targets. CISA and DHS have done a good job of coordinating with state elections officials. So for state policymakers and state think tanks, DHS and CISA are good resources, but also make sure elections officials are completely in correspondence with each other and with DHS and CISA. Ensure databases are encrypted, two-factor authentication enabled, access is minimized only to those who need it, ensure proper training, and then as far as disinformation, the best way to prevent that is proper cyber hygiene, which means training people on how to recognize potential phishing attempts, as well as teaching the general populace how to consume news and information. And I realize I'm going a little long. There's a lot more I could talk on perhaps later, but if there's any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate all of that. Let me offer a quick comment here that came in, and then get your contact information. So Steve Del Bianco writes, Jonathan is right about the Russian aim to disrupt our civil discourse and election confidence. Consider that much of Russia's social media trolling came after Trump's election, simply to stir up racial unrest. I'm sorry, yeah, racial unrest. So thank you for that, Steve. Jonathan, if folks want to get in touch with you with more questions or with any questions, or find out more, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Best way is email. It's J Hauenschild, so that is JHAUEN, S as in Sierra, C as in Charlie, H as in Hotel, ILD as in Delta, at ALEC.org.
In other words, Hauenschild, just like it sounds.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to all of our speakers. Dan, I will turn it over to you for the wrap up.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bartlett, for hosting today, and thanks everybody for joining. We had a great group on, great speakers, and we're looking to do this again this fall. We were going to do something during Tech States during the SPN annual meeting, but as you know, the annual meeting for State Policy Network has gone online. I'm not sure there will be a Tech States this year, so we might step in and do something in September for our next call, and then stay tuned for our final meeting of the year, depending on what ALEC does this fall, Bartlett. But again, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being part of this new format, and if you want to get on our email list, WPC@washingtonpolicy.org. We'll do that, and also you'll be receiving our next tech newsletter that will feature all of these presentations as well, coming out in August. Thanks very much, and have a great rest of your summer.
Stay well, all.